Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Hasbiala Ahmed from MSpace. We are the local conveners for the Learning Collaborative Community of Practice here in Nigeria. And welcome to the second session of the Social Norms, Foundation of Social Norms Practice, Part 2. Um, I do hope and look forward to exciting conversations, and I hope to also learn from this training today. And good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're calling from. Over.
Hi, hello everyone, and my name is Ben, and I will lead this session today. This is the second practical session that we are organizing for you. The goal of this session is to review methods to diagnose social norms, and then have a little bit of time to play with these methods and try to apply them in a practical way. So without any further ado, I'll start the review part, and then we'll have a chance, as I mentioned, for you to do some work in a breakout room or multiple breakout rooms, and try to apply these methods to your work, whatever you're currently working on, whatever practice of interest you have, to find ways to diagnose social norms related to that practice of interest. So, as I mentioned, welcome and recap, a group activity. We will hear back from the groups, and then we will wrap up with a little assignment for the next week. So first of all, I'd like to know if could you please raise your hand? There is a small button in Zoom. Could you please raise your hand if you have if you if you have been in if this is could you raise your hand if this is the first webinar of the entire series you participate in? So we had 4 theory webinars and 1 practical. Could you raise your hand if today is the first time you join? Okay, well, it looks like people have been in the seminars before. Okay, thank you. Now, could you raise your hand if you were here in the last practical, the one we did approximately 3-4 weeks ago? I see no one raising their hands. Is that because you don't know what? Oh, I see. Yeah, thank you. Mariam, thank you very much. And I also see Meredith, thank you. And Anya. Okay. Okay, so it looks like Mariam is the only person who was here the last time we did a practical. Let me just check the chat. Yeah. So in the last practical, we ended with a homework exercise. I will not put you on the spot, Mariam, don't worry. But just so you know, we ask people to start thinking about the practice of interest they work on, and to start thinking about norms related to that practice. It's fine if you haven't had the time to do it, and it's okay. If you had the time and for some reason you haven't raised your hand, please do start from that when we move into group work, and you will see how that is functional to what we're going to do today. Okay, so just to recap, what is a social norms diagnosis process? Well, even though we might have a sense of what social norms are related to our practice of interest, we might still want to understand whether our anecdotal evidence or our evidence based on previous data is still accurate and still up to date, which is why we try to put in place a process to identify if a norm exists in a given population, and even more deeply, what dynamics that norm unlocks within a given population? Is it a norm that is intertwined with power relations? Is it a norm that only applies within certain contexts? Is it a norm that that only applies within one given subset of the population? So, for instance, you might have a norm on child marriage that doesn't quite apply to people with high socioeconomic status when in the population of your intervention, and you might not know that. So really the diagnosing social norms part allows you to, one, uncover aspects of how social norms affect your practice of interest that you haven't taken into consideration, or two, it might help you uncover new norms and test your hypothesis of what norms actually affect your practice of interest. So this is a little graph that essentially says that you don't plan an intervention just based on your gut feeling, but you design an intervention based on evidence. Now, the right evidence you need to collect is based on how much you know. So if you only have a gut sense and you don't really have any data supporting your hypothesis of which norms sustain a given practice, we say you are in an exploratory phase. And very open-ended qualitative questions such as what are the advantages and what are the advantages of practicing child marriage? What are the disadvantages of practicing child marriage? What are the advantages of washing your hands? What are the disadvantages of washing your hands, etc., etc.? These very open-ended questions might give you a sense of what norms exist. If instead you already have some evidence suggesting that norms are related to a given practice, and this evidence might be previous evaluations that you've done with your intervention, or DHS data, or any other form of evidence that suggests that a given practice is sustained by norms related to the practice. So, for instance, going back to the child marriage example, you might know that a strong norm related to child marriage is that of premarital sex. So the fact that it is not acceptable for girls to have premarital sex, and that brings family shame. And because families are worried about the shame that will come up to them if if the girls had premarital sex, they send them into marriage early. So if you have some evidence suggests this, then you may want to investigate the dynamics of that norm, but still leaving some room for diversion. So for deviance to what you believe is the norm. And then when you have good evidence, you will move into measurement, which is what you will learn about or experience in our last practical seminar, which is not the next one, is the one after next. Since the next one we will discuss how to design an intervention based on good qualitative evidence. And then the last bit of this graph says that then that's when you understand, plan, and act and analyze your data. So again, when you start moving into a given space of action, you may want and you start designing interventions. Start asking and considering the evidence that you already possess, what evidence exists possibly in the literature, what people know about the context, and start to think about the way to measure and diagnose norms related to your context, such as which people are most likely to give and provide information. Is this a Muslim context? Is this a Catholic context? Is this a fairly not very religious context? So do you want to interview religious leaders? And then eventually consider the practicalities. What can we actually and realistically be collected? If you work with an illiterate population, obviously, you cannot collect diaries as evidence. So when we plan our norms diagnosis, useful questions that will come to you are, first of all, and we will go back to this towards the end of the presentation, who do we need to talk to? Is it religious leaders, as I mentioned, if this is a strongly religious context? Is it parents, which it might be if we are looking forward to diagnose a norm related to childbearing practices? Then again, what kind of knowledge do we want to elicit? What kind of evidence do we want to have? What do we want to ask them about? Of course, we want to elicit norms, but what about their own attitudes? What about their factual beliefs? So say that, for instance, your practice of interest is related to child nutrition and or exclusive breastfeeding, and you want to understand the universe of factors affecting breastfeeding. First of all, you might want to understand what parents know about breastfeeding. Do they believe that exclusive breastfeeding kills the child? That is not a norm, that is a factual belief. Or do we want to ask them whether they themselves believe breastfeeding is a good thing? And they might say that no, it's not a good thing, that they personally hate it. Then we might want to ask them about norms. What about other people? What about the extent to which other people would approve of you practicing breastfeeding and your experiences? Have you in the past practiced exclusive breastfeeding, and what happened? Can you tell me the story? And finally, you may want to ask yourself, what questions should we ask and what methods will we use? Which is what we will see in a minute. So what approaches are out there and exist to diagnose social norms? One that is very commonly used are individual interviews. They can particularly be useful to understand reference groups and as well as people's experiences. So you may want to ask, if you wanted to decide whether to do breastfeeding, whose advice would you seek? So these, just as a reminder, the reference group is the group of people that influence whether one person will make an action or not. So if I am thinking about breastfeeding my child, whose opinion matters to me in deciding whether I will do exclusive breastfeeding? Another good question for individual interviews could be, after having done a given practice, for instance, after having cut your daughter, after having given your daughter off in marriage, would someone congratulate you? Who? And how would that make you feel? Or the opposite, if you didn't marry off your daughter, who would you be afraid someone found out, and why? So this is really getting at the shame that one person might feel towards, say, for instance, their in-laws for contravening the norm. Another approach could be ranking exercises. Ranking exercises is a participatory action research exercise in which we ask, usually done in focus groups, but can also be done by in individual interviews, in which we ask people to rank, to put in order from the least powerful to the most powerful, or the least relevant to the most relevant, a series of concepts. It might be helpful in this case to understand which norms are more relevant to a given practice of interest. We could, for instance, ask people, how should a girl in this community behave? What, or which is to mean, what are the actions that make a girl in this community respectable? Then participants could, in a focus group, could brainstorm. They could give you 10, they could give you 15. That's the first step. Then the second step is that you take these 10, 15 actions that make a girl in a given community respectable. You may want to add the one that are interesting to you as well, such as getting married before she's 18, not engaging in premarital sex, practicing exclusive breastfeeding, whatever the practice of interest is for you. And then you would ask participants to rank them, to put them in order from the one that is most important for a girl, so that she demonstrates that she can be, she deserves honor and respect, to the one that is least important. And feel free to interrupt me at any time if anything that I'm saying is not particularly clear or requires a clarification. And a third approach to exploring norms are focus group discussions. So focus group discussions, of course, can integrate a variety of technologies and strategies to elicit the discussion. But the powerful aspect of doing focus group discussions is that you can observe the ways in which conversations go when participants have to justify their thinking and feeling in front of others. You could even carry out both individual interviews and focus group discussions, and then analyze the data to see and try to understand whether there is any difference in what people say when they are having one-to-one individual interviews with a facilitator, and when instead the same people have to justify their choice in front of other people. In this case, questions that work well in the past are, how do you think girls are expected to behave in this community? Or in which situation is it acceptable for a woman to be hit by her husband? And really collecting these so the power is beyond collecting the individual's opinions of people in the focus group, is to facilitate a conversation in which participants need to bring up their explanation and facilitate opportunities to agree and disagree on something, so that you can find divergences from what you believe to be the homogeneous norm. Another very powerful tool that you have, and I'll give you a couple of examples of this, is social network analysis. Social network analysis can be either qualitative and quantitative. I'll give you an example from qualitative social network analysis, which is less resource intense, and can be egocentric or sociocentric. Egocentric means that you start from one person and you ask them about a given practice of interest. Let me take child marriage again. And then you ask them, when you got married, there is a manual of this, and we can share it with you, that has been written by Bettina Shell Duncan and Holly Shakya, which is quite detailed. But the core of the technique is that you go to one person and you ask them, let me take child marriage. Actually, let me take breastfeeding, which is even easier. And you tell them, okay, I'd like to talk to you about your experiences when you were having your first child. And more in particular, I'd like to talk to you about the people who advised you and gave information on how to feed your very young child. And first, there is a technique called name generators, in which you start asking questions that seem to have nothing to do with breastfeeding, such as, can you tell me people you go to when you want to borrow some money, that you spend money with, that you spend time with? And then this gives you a list of, say, 30 people. And then you say, okay, among these 30 people, who are the 5 people who are most important to you when seeking advice for exclusive breastfeeding? And what you get to, we did it for in Cameroon, we did it for child marriage, and look at the difference within these two networks. This is a network from the Maka ethnic group. The Maka are that we interviewed lived in the southeast of the country, which is very resource rich. In a way, you could say that people, let me say this in a very uh, controversial way, but they need each other less because they have many resources. And this is, look, this is the green dot is our ego person, a girl. And we asked them who was a key decision maker in your wedding. And she said, the sister, my friend, and my aunt. Then what we did, we went to these people. We went to the father and asked the father, who are the 5 people who are more important, who you asked advice from when you needed to make a decision about this girl's wedding? So look at the difference. This is the Maka network in the southeast of the country. And this instead is the Musgum, another ethnic groups network in the north of the country. The north of Cameroon is much desertified. People share resources. So you see that people are much more involved in one person's wedding. So here's the girl mentioned the father, the mother, the uncle, the other uncle, the stepmother. And then we went to the uncle. The uncle mentioned the neighbors, the cousin, the sister. The father mentioned the cousin, the father. So then you start understanding, okay, who are the people that I need to target in my intervention? If I want to change norms around child marriage, I will need, in this case, if I'm in this network, I will need to work with a girl's uncles, fathers, mother, and stepmother. And finally, another
Hmm.
method to exploring norms.
Then
Yes?
should we pause before we do the
Yeah,
last method to see if
absolutely.
I think we went over 4 methods, 4 approaches, sorry. Should we pause just to see if there's any questions?
Yeah,
We talked about interviews, ranking exercises, focus groups, and the social network analysis. And I think
Absolutely.
the vignettes is going to be a big one. So
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. Absolutely. Maybe we could also see if anyone has used any of these methods before. Is this something completely new to you? Is this something you've used in the past? Maybe not to collect data on social norms, but in general to collect data. Let's see, if you have any comments or experiences, you could either unmute yourself and share them or even write them in the chat. I'll pause for a few seconds. And again, the question is, have you ever used focus groups or interviews or ranking exercises or social network analysis? Or please even comment just to say, oh no, I've never used any of this. This is all new to me, okay? So I will assume that nobody will stay silent because people will either say, yes, I've used it, or no, I've never used it. Unless you really, really want to be silent, in which case it's fine.
I was going to share something while other people are maybe thinking. I really enjoyed hearing about, you described the ranking exercise, and I wanted to just mention that a fun way of doing that can be with what we call a pile sort, where people write down, if they're literate, can write down ideas on cards, and then people can arrange them, in different orders. So I often do a ranking exercise, starting with a pile sort, and then moving into the ranking.
Thank you, Rebecca. I wonder if Dorothy or Emma or Tozin or Kemi or Mariam or Ibrahim, Hadiza, Ado, Mohammed, Uchenna or Comrade have ever used any of these methods?
Hi, this is Mariam.
Hi.
Yeah, so I'm quite familiar with some of the methods you mentioned, like the focus groups. Unfortunately, I haven't started in my project, but I have that plan to have a focus group discussions to explore exclusive breastfeeding habits. Thank you. Over.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Lawal. We also use a focus group discussion and during our formative research to identify barriers to data quality in our project, primary care data quality improvement project. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Everyone, this is Emma. I have used the focus group discussion method or approach to identify on the Women Economic Empowerment Program to identify the various traits that are applicable, that could be applicable or used or and entered into by women, adolescent girls between ages of 15 and 24 in selected communities. So yes, I am well aware of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Emma.
Hello?
Yes, hi, Tozin, we can hear you.
Hello, good afternoon now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. For me, I've also used the focus group discussion in one of the projects we are running currently now, which is evidence for collaboration in the two local governments, Kauru and Makarfi. What we try to do is to identify key target groups, adolescent boys and girls, rural women, and people with disability. So we try to identify their needs according to groups, and it's one strategy that has been helping us to really bring out those needs according to groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, anyone else? Yeah,
Hello?
Yes, hi, hello. We can hear you.
Yeah, can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Yeah, we have a project in Kano whereby we are targeting we apply community dialogue because we want to address the issue of non-acceptance of family planning strategy, more especially among the age group of 20, age group of 18 to 35 years. In this issue, it involves the community, whereby we are trying to sensitize the community people through dialogue in order to get in to know the concept and the benefit of the importance of family planning in our own society. Hello?
Yes. Yeah, you broke up a little bit. So you said you have experience using focus groups to understand the acceptability of family planning. Did I get this right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for
thank you.
experience. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. And is there any question on these methods that I've used? It seems to me that not many people have used social network analysis. Is there any question on that specifically? Otherwise, I'll move forward. Okay. So what are vignettes? Vignettes are a tool that is increasingly common when it comes to social norms. I think they're particularly helpful when you already have a good idea of what social norms you want to target. They're not extremely helpful when you have no idea, no evidence, and no data, even though they can still play a role even then. Vignettes are little stories, right, about imaginary characters. Some people call them case studies, but essentially they're little stories. And in these stories, there are also some guiding questions that invite people to respond and react to these stories. Their reactions reveal whose opinions they value and how communities may react to norms being challenged. We will see an example in a second. So this is from the social norms analysis plot. This table is not the one that is usually shown. If you want to see the usual, sorry, there is a reference there in the lower right hand side of the slide, which is a little bit small, but that's where you'll be able to find the original. This is one that we created for a report. And I like this version a little bit better because it shows the example from a vignette. So the snap suggests that you start by setting the background, where participants are introduced to the main character. The main character is faced with a situation when the social norm under diagnosis, that we are interested in, will come into play. Here's an example. I'll tell you the story of a girl called Rahima. One day, we created this. At the time, I was a volunteer for CARE. We created this story back in 2013 or 15, I think, 15. I'll tell you a story of a girl called Rahima. One day, Rahima is at school. Everyone has left, but her teacher, Joseph, and another teacher, Ben, from another class. The two are talking about work. Rahima drops the teacher's bag, and that drops on the floor. The teacher tells her to take it up. She responds, "You can take it up yourself. Are you too old or weak, maybe?" So you see, bang, this takes us to, obviously there is a tension. This creates the background. Then we ask questions about the descriptive norm. So what will people do? So we ask participants, what do you think will Joseph do? What will most teachers from the school do in this situation? So we don't tell them that Joseph hits her. We just ask them what happens, because they might surprise us. They might say, oh, in these schools, teachers are very progressive, and they just tell her, "Oh, okay, I want to talk to your parents. Please tell them that I want to see them next week." Then we ask about the injunctive norm. The injunctive norm requires a third party observing the interaction between the teacher and the girl, which is why we introduce Ben to begin with. And we ask, what will Ben expect Joseph to do in this situation, right? So we really want to try to understand what participants think that other teachers expect them to do. But then here's a twist in the story. We tell that the main character actually doesn't comply with the norm. Okay, he's an, or in this case she, but in this case he is an outlier. So Joseph doesn't beat Rahima. He tells her, "I'll talk to your parents next week," and takes up his own bag. You see, if our hypothesis is that the norm is, or you should really hit this girl, this unruly student, then we make the character do the opposite. And then we go on sanctions and we ask, what will Ben say to other teachers about Joseph's behavior? What will he say to Joseph? So what happens when you don't comply with the norm? And then you could ask, that's what the SNAP framework suggests. I think this is kind of a little bit advanced, and I will suggest you first become comfortable with the first three types of questions. But if you want, you can ask to participants to discuss what sensitivity they have to sanctions. So how will sanctions will push them to comply with the norm? In this case, the question that we used was, let's imagine that Ben says, you must beat children when they lack respect, otherwise you'll never be a good teacher. Do you think that Ben's opinion will change Joseph's behavior in the future? And finally, exceptions. Are there any circumstances where it would be considered more or less acceptable for Joseph not to beat Rahima for her behavior? This is not a bad framework. It's not about plot to create social norms vignettes. So when we want to create a vignette, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, we need to be clear, what is the practice of interest that this vignette will talk about? What is the norm that we're interested in, or what are the norms? And if you were here in the last seminar, you will know that we tend to think about writing a norm so that we have a subject, a reference group, and an action. So in this case, our subject was teacher, the reference group was other teachers, and the action was beating. So teachers believe that other teachers find beating acceptable, if not even appropriate, right? And then where is the action happening? Because the setting of the action might change quite a bit. Is it happening at home? Is it happening at the market? Is it happening at school? In our case, we make this happen at school. Of course, the setting changes because it changes what people can see the action happening, which in itself changes the norm, the compliance with the norm. Now, be careful. How much detail do we want to put in a vignette? Let's look at this vignette. One day, Penda wants to get her daughter cut. She lives in the suburbs of Kaolack, which is a city in Senegal. Her daughter is 12 and her husband is working in France. She went to school in Dakar. She goes to the market to ask around who could help her find a cutter. Her father at the time tells her she should go home as women are allowed to go outside of the household. They have a big fight and Penda calls a friend to cheer her up. Her friend tells her she just went to the clinic to get some family planning methods. So let's get some reaction. Do you think this is a good vignette to understand social norms around female genital cutting? Or there is a little bit of clutter that we could cut? What do you think? In other words, is there any parts, any sentences in this vignette that are confusing and add too much detail? What do you think? So for instance, do you think it's helpful? Yes, is someone want to say something? Okay. Nwankwo, I don't know if you want, you're muted. I don't know if you want to say something. No, you went back to mute, which I assume is a reply, negative reply. So here's a lot of the stuff is too much detail. So the fact that the daughter is 12 is based on our hypothesis that that's the age of cutting. But is it really good to say it? What if cutting in this community happens at age 55? Participants might say, oh no, that's not good because the daughter is too old. And we burnt the vignette, right? What about the fact that the husband works in France? That makes Penda a very peculiar woman. It is the fact that she goes to the market at the right place. And what about all that piece about the father telling she should not go out because women are allowed to go outside of the household, and the fact that the friend tells her about family planning? That stuff has got nothing to do and will distract the participants from the actual vignette. So here's a better version. I'd like to tell you the story of a fictional character, Panda. Imagine Panda is from this village. I don't want you to think about a panda you know. Let's just pretend she's a typical woman from around here. And this is important because people in the past told us the stories of the woman they knew with that name. Panda has one daughter, Nabu, who has reached an age that Panda thinks is a good age to get cut. You see, we're not saying she's 12. So one day Panda is thinking about getting her cut and she's looking for advice. Enough detail. And then we ask, who do you think she'll seek advice from? Why do you think she will ask these people? What do you think these people will say? Conversely, sorry, there's a typo there, but who would she be afraid to ask? Why would she be afraid to ask these people? And then we continue our vignette. One day, Panda is at home and she's talking to her friends about getting her daughter cut. Panda tells her friends she's decided she doesn't want Nabu to get cut. A nosy neighbor is hearing this outside of the window. Panda sees the neighbor after she's spoken with her friend. In your opinion, what will the neighbor think about Panda's decision? What will Panda feel knowing that the neighbor heard this conversation? So you see, we're telling a story and breaking the story at different points. The last point about doing good vignettes is that we found that usually using visual anchors is extremely better. So even doing very basic stuff, this is the story of a man, this bottle, being at home and he meets his wife has cheated on him and he walks away without saying a word. And then this man finds his friends, you see, and his friends say, so what did you do? Did you beat her up? And he says no, and they say, okay, well then we asked participants what would the friends say, and participants told us, well, they would tell him to go back home and beat her up, and if he's not strong enough they would buy him a beer. So you see, even something this rudimentary. My PhD student tested these methods, was actually one of my former PhD students, now she's graduated. She tested this method and she found that even these little cards can be helpful, but the best of all was to use these little Playmobil characters, these little dolls. So if you have the opportunity, as you tell a story with a vignette, using little characters or drawings can really help participants follow the story. Okay, any questions or comments on the use of vignettes that I just recapped for you?
Yeah, I have a comment then. I really loved hearing about the use of visual anchors. And I was going to say, in Nepal, I did vignettes using little dolls. And I did them because we were working with children. But then I found that the parents and the adults and the grandparents loved working with the little dolls just as much as the kids.
Thank you, Rebecca. Great example. Thank you very much. That's very true. Again, in the past, this needs to be very context sensitive. When we were in Cameroon, we tried to use cards, like playing cards. Like we said, oh, the king is the husband, the queen is the wife, and the ace is the child. And participants told us, oh, when we pilot tested it, people said, oh, because card, what was the word? Not you know, playing for money is illegal in the country. We didn't want people to think that we were betting on cards. But yeah, your example is perfect, Rebecca. Any other comments or questions on this? Mariam, I see, you're not unmuted. Any other comments?
I guess my question is, when do you know what approach to use in getting, to finding facts about a problem statement? At what point do you know which one to use? Do you go testing all of them and then, based on what you get, you narrow down one, or you just, what are the factors you should use in considering an approach to employ?
I think it's three things. Number one, you could say, well, what am I more comfortable using? Very very easily, like very practically. Like you could say, oh, I've done this great training and I really learned well about vignettes. I want to use vignettes. So that's the first reason to choose. The second reason is how much do you know about the practice of interest? As I mentioned, vignettes can be very helpful, but when you have absolutely no idea, other examples such as ranking exercises or very open-ended questions might be better. And then the third point that you might want to use is, what exactly do I want to know about? What is important in my intervention? Am I designing a behavioral change intervention where I need to target exactly the right people? If so, because I have limited resources, perhaps. If so, then you may want to say, well, to make sure that we get the right reference group, let's do social network analysis. Or instead, you might be saying, oh, I want to understand the differences between ethnic groups because we are working in villages where there are multiple ethnic groups. And in that case, you might do focus groups with people, use your resources to do more focus groups, but you could do focus groups that are homogeneous per ethnic group, so that then you have enough data to compare and contrast what people say. So these three things: what you may used to, what exactly is your question, and how much about social norms do you already know. Does that answer your question, Emma?
Yes, it does. Thanks. That's really very helpful.
Right.
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
Hi. I just want to add that the clarification or definition on the use of vignettes is helpful because I think I've used them wrongly, provided way too much information or detail. So this is really helpful to know how to use going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Rehana. Thank you very much. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we try to use one of these methods altogether? And we might start from the vignettes since it's the one that we spent more time on. Okay, so what we're going to do, we are going to break up in probably two rooms, I guess, but Meredith, I'll leave this to you to decide. And what we will try and do is we will decide, first of all, we will use the work of one of you as a case study, right? So if I were in a group, I could say, hi, well, first of all, you may want to introduce yourselves and then say, hi, everyone, I'm Ben and I'm working on child marriage. Could we take child marriage as a case study? So that's a practice of interest. Don't worry, I suspect that you will have time to go at least to a second one. And then as a group, we'd like for you to create a tool to explore the norms related to the practice of interest. You could do vignettes, a ranking, think of a ranking exercise, think of any other participatory exercise. I suggest you start with developing a vignette. If you complete and you're satisfied with what you came up with, of course, the goal here is not to come up with the best vignette, but to try and come together and remind together each other of what we said during this presentation and come up with a nice vignette that you kind of like and with the good questions that you will use to break the action, the vignette at different points. And then when you're done completing that vignette, you can either try to design a ranking exercise, either try to design another method, or to try and do a second vignette. It's totally fine. Don't worry if you don't get all of these, or to try and design some interview questions, or try and design to think about what practice of interest you would use for social network analysis, and how well will social network analysis help you understand the reference group for the practice of interest. Okay, is there any question on the actual exercise that we're going to do next? Okay, thank you. So I suggest we break up into groups and reconvene in maybe 40 minutes, so that we reconvene at past. And I think, Meredith, you will send us in breakout rooms now, right?
Yep, I think we're all set. So if you get kicked out of your room and you come back in, you should be able to see which room you'd like to rejoin. So I'm going to name the rooms Ben's room and Rebecca's room, and we'll split out, and then we'll be back here automatically in 40 minutes.
And as a note, Meredith has put in the chat the PDF with the slides in case you want to consult them while you do the exercise, or just have them with you in the next few days. Yep, great.
All right, here we go.
Okay. Very well. Let's, oop. We had a very interesting discussion, Meredith.
That's great.
About access to sexual and reproductive health services.
Cool. I think I think we'll definitely see that the groups can learn from each other. We did exclusive breastfeeding in the other group as our example, and it looks like maybe they're still making their way back. Oh, here they come. Okay, I'm seeing them up here. Okay, I think we have everybody back now.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I hope you had a very fruitful conversation. So we have Modupe, who's going to present the results of our group work, and I have them here on a slide. So maybe we could start if that's okay. And Modupe, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm here. Okay. Just like I mentioned, I think I joined in a bit late, but I will try my best. So for this presentation, we wrote the vignette after identifying the possible social norms around adolescent girls and boys' access to sexual and reproductive health services in northern Nigeria. So the social norm that was focused on was the health system being against adolescents accessing SRH services. And so we wrote the story, the vignette, the story, which goes, I'll just read the story to say, would like to tell you a story. So that's not to be corrected. This is
No,
the
sorry,
story
that's
of
a typo.
Miriam.
I think it was meant to
Yeah,
say
it was
we'd
a
like now
typo.
to tell your
Yeah.
story. Sorry.
Yeah, would like us to tell the story. The story of Miriam, a typical adolescent girl from this village. So we said, please do not think of a real Miriam from this village. The story is just using that name. Hypothetically, this is a fictional name, but do not think Miriam as a typical girl from around here. So the story goes on. One day, Miriam learns from her teacher about sexual and reproductive health and the different methods for family planning. She decides to go to a healthcare facility nearby to speak to a provider. She gets to the facility and was informed that and informed the provider about what she learned and if she could get additional information to help her make her choice. She is welcomed by a healthcare provider. So this is the story, but at this point, we felt it was important to ask some questions because if it was an interview with adolescent girls or a focus group discussion with a group of adolescent girls and boys, then it would be appropriate to ask questions, probe at that point. So our questions for this paragraph of the story say, what do you think the health provider would tell her? In this case, what would the health provider tell Miriam? Why do you think the healthcare provider would say whatever she said to Miriam in response to the response from, in probing the response from the participants? Then would most healthcare providers tell Miriam the same? So looking at this, how many healthcare providers do they think would tell her whatever the healthcare provider has told her from the perspective of the adolescent? And then would there be any risk for the healthcare provider to say the opposite of what she said? Before now, the reality is that the healthcare provider will tell Miriam that she's too young to be asking for that kind of information and that she should go home. So that's the reality. We are also assuming that the adolescent will come up with that line of story and tell us. But of course, in some instances, we may also get some different variations. So whatever the case is, we will be able to get into the mind of the adolescent to find out what they think the healthcare provider to tell Miriam. Then the story continues. The healthcare provider says there is no problem, that Miriam has a variety of choices and that that is the healthcare provider, will help her choose what to say. As Miriam leaves the room, the supervisor asks the healthcare provider to speak. Again, we would like to find out from the adolescent, what do you think the supervisor tell her? What do you think will happen as a consequence for the career of the healthcare provider? Then what do you think the other healthcare provider will say about her? What else could the healthcare provider do differently to help Miriam? Now, the story continues that Miriam went back home. On her way back, she meets her mother, and her mother asked her what she did today. Now, the questions we'll be interested in to ask will be, do you think Miriam will tell her the truth, will tell the truth to her mother or lie? Why? Or why not? What could influence her, in terms of what she would tell her mother? And then what would most adolescents do in this situation? What would they do? Miriam tells the truth to her mother that she has gone to the clinic to ask about family planning methods. So then we ask, what do you think her mother would say? Will she be happy or not? Why? And why not? Miriam also had that the healthcare provider said there are many options for her to choose from and that she will help her to decide. Then we ask, the mother says to her, the mother says she wants to speak to the healthcare provider too. Do you think she wants to tell her? Sorry, what do you think she wants to tell her or ask her? I think what does the mother want to tell the healthcare provider? Will the mother talk about what Miriam said with her people, with other people? For instance, we should speak to Miriam's father about this. Why or why not? We should speak with the neighbor about this. Why and why not? And then we should speak with the religious leaders about this. Why and why not? So these are just to help us find out how she will relate this story to other influencers in her life. Thank you. Any other additions?
Thank you very much, Modupe. Let's see if there is any questions or comments from our group or from the other group that anyone would like to make.
Ben, I was wondering how long a typical vignette goes on for. Do you just base that on how much time you have of the group that you've brought together or the individual that you've brought together, or are there like general guidelines for how much,
Thank you.
yeah, how long or how much time you would take on it?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. Very good. I think I kind of like vignettes that at least break up twice, because I like when the story gets a little bit richer and participants start really seeing the vignette. I don't like vignettes that are just a few lines and then ask questions and that's it. At the same time, you don't want to make them too long, otherwise these characters start becoming real persons almost, and you kind of lose the plot. But I would suggest a vignette kind of as long as the one we have made is maybe at the top limit for me. Okay, but I think it's a good length if you have the introduction and you go. So we see in this vignette we try to uncover two set of norms. The first one, actually three. The first one is the norms that adolescents have towards health providers, stuff like, oh, I'll be sent away. The second is the norms that health provider have, what is going to happen to them if they accept, if they do give family planning methods. And the third one, in this part over here, is the norms about the mother. Can we talk to the mother? And actually even the fourth one, can the mother talk to others? It's a lot, but this was mostly an exercise. I think touching upon two, maximum three norms in a vignette is good. Sticking to only one norm, unless you really need a lot of detail, might be a little bit of a missed opportunity. So I think somewhere, this is the top limit, but something with a vignette that breaks in 2 points is not a bad compromise.
Okay,
Yeah,
I see.
I think we were going to say the same thing. I see a question from Dorothy.
Yeah, I do have a question. Do the questions unfold as we're doing this process, or do you kind of pre-design some of the questions before you meet with the group, or do they unfold as you meet with the group?
That's another very good question. Yes, so I think it's good to have, it really depends. Okay, the general rule is that it's best to have the questions prepared beforehand, as we did in this example, okay?
Yeah.
But of course, if you have someone extremely experienced and who understands how social norms theory works, then you can also allow them to improvise a little bit. But it's, in my experience, because I often train interviewers who never heard about social norms and it's their first time collecting this data, I make sure that there is at least a solid basis for them to ask questions about. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
maybe just to add that it could be a combination of the two approaches, just like you're conducting a normal focus group discussion. You usually would have a moderator's guide. And in some cases, in the process of conducting the interviews, some probe questions might emerge based on the response of the participants. So it's also the same way, but it's also good to have a guide ahead of time that probe questions can be added as relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, shall we move on to the vignettes prepared by the other group? I don't know if you have a screen share, but I'll stop sharing just in case.
Thanks, Ben. We do. Thanks to Anya, and Mariam is going to talk us through it. We were able to build on the worksheet homework she had done.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me loud enough.
Perfectly.
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So it was quite interesting working with my group. We had Rebecca, Meredith, Anya, and Hadiza, and also Adu. So we started working on a little script I had written down for using the assignments given to us and focusing on exclusive breastfeeding. We took some time, to reflect on the story, which we all agreed was a bit too long, and we shortened it, and that's what we arrived with here. So I'll just go by what we discussed. So we focused on exclusive breastfeeding, and the thought around was in the community, mixed feeding is practiced and not exclusive breastfeeding. So I'll start by Amina Yusuf is a 20-year-old and is 6 months pregnant. She lives with her extended family in Futuk village. Just a reminder as well, Amina is a fictional, so if you know any Amina, just put that behind you. She delivered her daughter at home and with the support of her mother-in-law and traditional birth attendant. And Amina is deciding how to feed her child. So we started by coming up with these questions like, who would Amina talk to for advice on what to feed her child? And, we thought about the reference group, like the traditional birth attendant, the mother-in-law, and some other female relatives. And so another question we had was, what advice might they give? And so our answers around were, okay, they might tell her to do the mixed feeding, or since that's what's being practiced, and if she goes to her mother-in-law. So sorry, let me just go through the questions, and then if we have any questions, reflect on. So Amina decides only to breastfeed her child instead of mixing other foods or water. And how would the TBA react when they learn this? What would the TBA suggest Amina does instead? And what would you think other mothers might do? Do you know other mothers who are exclusively breastfeeding? And so we all discussed, and there were different reactions, especially with the TBA. The TBA might advise her based on what the practices are in the community, and other mothers as well, since that's what they practice. And so we know from the questioning, we're able to lead up to if really these are the things that people do, or they exclusively breastfeed, or they practice mixed feeding. So Amina's mother-in-law visits one day, and Amina decides to speak to her mother-in-law about breastfeeding exclusively. How might Amina's mother-in-law react? And we also discussed that thinking, based on the fact that Amina's mother-in-law is an elderly person in the community, should definitely want to advise her to do the mixed feeding, since that is what is practiced. And what might her mother-in-law suggest she does? That's what I just answered down. She would want her to do what every other person does. And what would Amina do? So we're thinking here, Amina would let her mother-in-law know about the benefits of exclusive breastfeeding from her own knowledge. And so we concluded by saying Amina decides to exclusively breastfeed after speaking to her mother-in-law. So we got cut off time and we weren't able to do much, but it was quite interesting putting all the stages together. Thank you. Over. I don't know if anyone, maybe Rebecca would want to add, or Meredith. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. Yeah, I don't know if anyone from the group wants to add anything. Okay.
Nothing from me.
People... Oh, yes, Meredith. Yeah, please.
Oh, nothing from me to add. Thanks.
Great. What do people from our group think? Any reactions?
So I'm
Okay,
thinking that it appears the story actually is exploring about two social norms, which I think is good. Well, the fact that she mentioned that they were cut off the time and so that it looks like there could have been a lot more paragraphs added. But of course, I understand the fact that they were cut off the time and we couldn't continue. Because exclusive breastfeeding is actually a very important point in development of.
I don't know if it's your connection or mine, but you disappeared.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I can hear you now.
Yeah, we could still hear her.
Sorry.
Right, okay. I guess my network is fluctuating. So I was just saying that exclusive breastfeeding is critical in infant nutrition, growth and development. And of course, a lot of that this story appears to measure about two social norms, which I think is good. But then for the fact they were cut off with time, maybe some other storylines could have been added, to further explore. Maybe also the norms around health workers' perception around it, how, if in any way families or mothers seek information, from health workers, even though we know that this is more around the traditional birth attendants, but again, how do health workers also feature in this? Yeah, so just thinking around that.
I have a concern. Can I go ahead? Hello?
Yes, please.
Okay. The story, I think, touches on is a wide span. I mean, they talked about home delivery and then talked about that's delivering at home with TBAs. And then that talked about breastfeeding. So I think it's a little bit wide. Meanwhile, the questions just focused on breastfeeding alone. So I think it's better to just separate it by, the story could have been shorter because it just complicates it. Some information may not be necessary at this point. You could have just said, for example, that Amina delivered at home with a TBA. Just that's it. Or following delivery of, that's leaving out the full story about delivered her daughter with the support of the mother-in-law and traditional birth attendants. I think that should be left out so that there could be more focus on what exactly you want to, focus on. Over. And then there are some questions, for example, that I really wonder. One question, for example, Amina decides to only breastfeed a child instead of mixing in other foods or water. I don't know if they should say so, that this was what Amina did, or just leave it out and just ask. I think that question that asked, how do you think Amina will feed this child? Will open up, more understanding of the practices, in that place. If this, for example, they mention that in the next question, if they mention, for example, that is mixed feeding, then you then say, why do you think they do that?
Thank you, Mark.
So far, good.
Okay, yeah, I think these are thoughtful comments.
Should we have a response, or do we need to wrap up?
We're kind of at time. My personal, I think the vignette is a good one. I think that the amount of detail will be really contextual to what you need to know. I was a bit unsure. I think it needs, what I would suggest to clarify, because she's 6 months pregnant, but she's also delivered. So I will clarify, maybe I will say she delivered and now she's pregnant again, if it's important for you that she's pregnant right now with the second child. I will clarify that a little bit. I think that Martin's point, it's up for discussion. We will need a little bit more time to understand why this information has been included. There might be a reason that is fundamental. I kind of like when there is a little bit of detail. I like to tell stories. So I personally would have left just Amina decides to only breastfeed her child. I usually write something like, Amina listens to the advice and she thinks over a little bit, and then she eventually decides that she would like to only breastfeed her child and not mix. So I like to put a little bit more words, but in general, I think the vignette works. Possibly we could have included other reference groups and tell a little bit of a story. Like we could have said that Amina is deciding how to feed her child at the end of the first paragraph, and decides to talk to the traditional birth attendants right after the delivery when her mother-in-law is still there. And then we could say what the traditional birth attendant says, and immediately what, and then we could say the traditional birth attendant now leaves because she needs to go back to work. And will the mother-in-law at this point share her opinion? What do you think? And what will she say? What will she advise? Maybe something like this. But generally speaking, I think this is a good vignette as well.
Great. I will
Okay.
just note that we put the breastfeeding practice there, the exclusive breastfeeding practice, to give an example of going against the norm so that we could see if there would be sanctions. So for Martin's point, that was why we did that.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you. So this concludes our seminar on diagnosing social norms. If you intend to participate in the next seminar, it would be really helpful if you thought about a little bit about your practice of interest, and you thought about the intervention that you're currently working on to address it, and you ask yourself the question, is this intervention effective in addressing social norms, or is there any shortcoming that you'd like to bring into our next seminar? Okay, great. Thank you very much for the great work you've done. And Meredith, back to you.
Thanks, Ben. Could you show the slide that is coming up that shows the next session?
Oops, absolutely.
Okay, so based on the homework that Ben shared, that will kind of set the stage for us to work further on in session 3, which is on April 7th, Wednesday at the same time. And that's when we will get really into strategies for norm change. Today, we were just looking at how you figure out the norms, diagnose them, and next time we'll go into addressing them with the theory of change and ways to shift norms. So we really look forward to having you there, and we will share the slides and the recording from this session. And if you saw the note in your inboxes today, you can also watch the recording and see the slides from our first session if you missed that one. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Ben. A great session.
Thank
Bye.
you. Rebecca, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's good.
Thank you, everyone.